First Contact's surprise. Commander Zara Valen stood motionless before the quantum observation array, her crystalline form reflecting the soft blue light of the ship's interior. For 3,000 years, she had led the Luminar exploration fleet, searching the cosmos for other sentient species worthy of joining the Eternal Concordat. In all that time, she had never encountered anything like this. Impossible, she whispered, the word taking a full minute to form as her ancient consciousness processed the sensor data. Run the temporal calculations again. Her second-in-command, Arxis, moved with characteristic eternal grace to the control panel. Commander, we have verified the data 13 times over the past 7 days. The findings remain consistent. He paused for the customary hour of contemplation before continuing. These beings progressed from primitive atmospheric vessels to quantum drive technology in less than 2 centuries. The massive exploration vessel, stretching nearly 20 kilometers in length, hung in space at the edge of what the local species called the solar system. The Luminar had detected the quantum signatures of faster-than-light travel experiments 6 months ago, but given their methodical nature, had only now arrived to investigate. "Show me their historical progression again," Zara commanded, her voice resonating with the weight of millennia. The holographic display materialized before them, showing Earth's technological advancement. The Luminar crew watched in stunned silence as the timeline unfolded. Where their own species had taken 50,000 years to progress from basic tool use to spaceflight, these humans had done it in less than 10,000. Their industrial revolution to quantum physics leap had occurred in barely 3 centuries. Their lifespans, Arxis noted, his crystalline features shifting in what passed for concern among their kind. Average duration, 80 solar rotations. Zara took 6 hours to process this information, an unusually quick response that reflected her growing unease. The shortest-lived sentient species the Luminar had previously encountered existed for at least 1,000 years. The concept of achieving consciousness, learning, contributing to society, and dying in less than a century seemed not just improbable, but horrifying. They must be desperate, she finally concluded, to achieve so much in so little time. What drives them? The answer came sooner than expected. A transmission penetrated their quantum shields, a feat that should have been impossible for such a young civilization. The message was crude by Luminar standards, carried on primitive electromagnetic waves, but its content was clear. Greetings, visitors. We are humanity. We come in peace and seek friendship among the stars. Please respond. The Luminar crew spent 3 days analyzing the linguistic patterns, cultural implications, and potential diplomatic ramifications of the message. They were still discussing the proper protocol for first contact when a small vessel appeared seemingly out of nowhere, having somehow masked its approach from their advanced sensors. The human ship was tiny by Luminar standards, barely half a kilometer in length. But what caught Zara's attention was its design. Elegant, efficient, and incorporating technological principles that the Luminar themselves had only theorized about. They've achieved in intuitive leaps what we accomplished through millennia of careful iteration, Arxis observed, his tone carrying what might have been awe. Commander, they're requesting real-time communication. Real-time communication was almost unheard of among the Luminar. Even simple conversations typically involved hours of contemplation between exchanges. The concept of immediate response was foreign to their methodical nature. Yet Zara found herself intrigued. These humans, with their brief, burning lives, had achieved the impossible. Perhaps it was time for the Eternal Concordat to learn new ways. Accept the transmission, she commanded, making the fastest decision of her 3,000-year life. Let us meet these beings who dare to race against time itself. The holographic interface sparkled to life, revealing Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth ship Horizon. The human moved with startling speed, her expressions changing rapidly, her words flowing in quick succession. But what struck Zara most was the intensity in the captain's eyes, a burning curiosity and determination that spoke of a species that knew its time was limited and was determined to make every moment count. On behalf of humanity, Captain Chin began, her words carrying both warmth and strength. We welcome you to our solar system. We have so many questions, so much to learn from each other. As Zyra prepared her carefully measured response, she realized that the Luminar's encounter with humanity would change both their species forever. These brief, brilliant beings might lack the Luminar's eternal existence, but they possessed something perhaps more valuable: the drive to make every moment of their limited lives matter. The age of careful contemplation was about to meet the era of bold action, and the galaxy would never be the same. The speed of innovation. The grand observation chamber of the Luminar vessel, Eternal Dawn, hummed with an energy that made its crystalline inhabitants distinctly uncomfortable. 3 weeks had passed since first contact, a mere blink to the immortal Luminar, but an eternity of activity for their human guests. Commander Zyra watched as Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the human quantum physicist, manipulated the holographic display with movements so swift they seemed almost violent to Luminar sensibilities. In the time it took Arxis to compose a single thought, the human had reconstructed their entire understanding of quantum field mechanics. Your basic principles are sound, Elena explained, her hands dancing through the complex equations, but you're approaching it too linearly. Look, if we introduce this quantum tunneling coefficient here and here, her fingers traced paths through the mathematical forest that had taken the Luminar 3 centuries to grow. Zyra felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in over 1,000 years. Genuine surprise. You're suggesting we bypass the standard resonance cascade. The words emerged faster than her usual pace, a sign of her growing adaptation to human rhythms. Exactly. Elena's eyes sparkled with excitement. Why spend centuries carefully building each quantum layer when you can teach them to assemble themselves? We discovered this principle about 15 years ago. It revolutionized our deep space navigation systems. 15 years. The Luminar in the chamber needed another full day to process that statement. Their own navigation systems had evolved through careful refinement over 12,000 years. The implications were simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Meanwhile, in the engineering section, human technician James Chen had reduced the power consumption of their quantum drive by 30% through what he called a few simple tweaks. The Luminar engineering team, led by the venerable Cyrix, had spent the last week just watching him work, their crystalline forms vibrating with a mixture of awe and horror at the speed of his modifications. The humans are changing everything, Arxis observed during a private meeting with Zyra. For once, he didn't take his customary hour to choose his words. Some of our people are concerned. Zyra understood the understatement in his words. The Luminar Conclave, their governing body, had been in continuous session since the humans arrived. Reactions among their people were deeply divided. Some saw humanity as a revelation, a species that could help them break free from the constraints of their methodical nature. Others viewed them as a dangerous contamination, a chaos factor that threatened the careful order of eternal existence. They've asked to share our biological data, Arxis continued. Their medical researchers believe they might be able to extend their lifespans. This information caused Zyra to pause for a full day of contemplation. The idea of humans living longer was both appealing and somehow wrong. Their brilliance seemed inextricably linked to their brevity. Would they lose that burning drive if they gained centuries instead of decades? Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent message, urgent by Luminar standards, which meant it had taken only 6 hours to compose. A group of conservative Luminar scientists had isolated themselves in a separate section of the ship, refusing to interact with the humans. They were calling for an immediate end to the cultural exchange. Their speed is unnatural, the message declared. They make decisions without proper consideration, implement changes without understanding the full implications. They must be contained before they destabilize everything we have built. But even as these concerns mounted, Zyra couldn't ignore the results. Human insights had already advanced Luminar technology in ways that would have taken millennia to achieve otherwise. More importantly, their presence had awakened something in her people, a recognition that perhaps eternal contemplation wasn't the only path to wisdom. The situation came to a head when Alina's team made an unprecedented discovery in the ship's quantum laboratory. They had been studying luminar temporal mechanics, the science that allowed their ships to navigate the complex currents of space-time. "Commander," Alina called out, her voice tight with excitement. "We think we found something. Your temporal field generators. They're not just for navigation, are they? They're capable of far more." Zyra moved to the display, her crystalline form catching the light of the quantum readouts. What she saw there sent ripples through her ancient consciousness. The humans hadn't just understood their temporal technology. They'd seen possibilities in it that the Luminar had never imagined in all their millennia of careful study. With some modifications, Alina continued, "We could create localized time dilation fields. Imagine spaces where we could match our different temporal experiences, areas where humans could slow down to luminar speed, or luminar speed up to human pace. We could truly work together, learn from each other." The implications were staggering. Such a breakthrough could bridge the vast gulf between their species' different relationships with time. But it would also irreversibly change luminar society. There would be no going back to the pure, methodical existence they had known. As Zyra prepared to convene an emergency session of the ship's council, one that would last hours instead of the usual months, she realized that humanity had already changed them more than anyone had expected. The question was no longer whether to accept this change, but how to navigate it without losing themselves in the process. The universe, it seemed, had plans that even eternal beings couldn't have foreseen. Crisis point. The warning came without ceremony, a burst of quantum disturbance that rippled through the fabric of space-time itself. In the observation chamber of the eternal dawn, both humans and Luminar watched as the sensor readings painted a picture of impending disaster. "A quantum cascade failure," Alina Rodriguez announced, her fingers flying across the holographic controls. "The experimental temporal fields we detected, they're collapsing." Commander Zyra's crystalline form pulsed with uncharacteristic urgency. The conservative faction of Luminar scientists, in their isolation, had been attempting to create a temporal barrier, a way to shield themselves from the contamination of human influence. Their careful calculations, performed over weeks rather than their usual years, had gone catastrophically wrong. "The collapse will create a temporal shockwave," Arxis reported, his voice carrying none of its usual measured calm. "If unopposed, it will tear apart the fabric of local spacetime. Both our ships will be destroyed." "How long do we have?" Captain Sarah Chen demanded from the bridge of the human vessel Horizon. The Luminar temporal specialist, Verix, began his standard calculation procedure. After careful analysis of the decay rate, 37 minutes, Alina cut in, her eyes fixed on her quantum readings. Maybe less. The chamber erupted into what passed for chaos among the Luminar. Several of their most experienced scientists began drafting proposals for containing the cascade, each taking the customary hours to formulate their thoughts. But they no longer had hours. The conservative faction's calculations weren't wrong, Alina said, studying the data streams. They were incomplete. They tried to create a temporal barrier without accounting for the quantum entanglement effects of our combined technologies. Our presence here changed the underlying quantum matrix. Zyra processed this information faster than she ever had before, in mere minutes rather than days. "Can it be stopped?" "Yes," Alina replied, "but not through careful calculation alone. We need to act now, using both our technologies in ways neither of us has attempted before. Commander, I need you to trust us." Trust. Such a simple word, yet it carried implications that shook the very foundation of Luminar philosophy. Their entire civilization was built on careful deliberation, on perfect understanding before action. What Alina proposed was anathema to everything they believed. But as Zyra watched the temporal distortion grow on their sensors, She realized that their traditional approach would doom them all. Sometimes, wisdom meant knowing when to abandon wisdom. "Tell us what you need," she said, making the fastest decision in her 3,000-year existence. What followed was a blur of activity that would be studied by both species for generations to come. Human engineers worked alongside Luminar technicians, combining their technologies in ways that defied conventional understanding. Alina's team reprogrammed the Eternal Dawn's temporal field generators, while James Chen modified the Horizon's quantum drive to create a resonance field. "The collapse is accelerating," Arxis reported. 22 minutes remaining. Captain Chen's voice came over the comm system. "Alina, we're ready on our end. The Horizon's quantum drive is modified to your specifications. The temporal field generators are recalibrated," Alina announced. "But there's a problem. Someone needs to manually synchronize the quantum resonance from within the field generator chamber. The radiation levels." "I will go," Zyra declared, moving toward the chamber entrance. "My crystalline form can withstand the radiation longer than any human." "No," Alina countered. "The synchronization needs to be done at human speed. Your natural temporal perception is too slow. You'd never complete the sequence in time." "Then we do it together," Zyra said. "Your speed, my resilience." What followed was unprecedented in the history of either species. Inside the temporal field generator chamber, Commander Zyra Valen, who had lived for 3,000 years, learned to move at human speed. Alina Rodriguez, whose entire life would be but a blink in Luminar terms, guided the ancient being through a series of adjustments that had to be performed in precise, rapid sequence. "Quantum resonance at 60%, James reported from the Horizon. "Temporal collapse in 15 minutes. Zyra's crystalline form began to crack under the strain of moving so quickly, but she persisted. Alina's hands flew over the controls, her eyes darting between multiple holographic displays as she coordinated the efforts of both ships. Resonance at 80%. 90. Full quantum synchronization achieved. The combined power of both vessels' temporal fields erupted in a brilliant display of energy. The quantum cascade collapse was caught in a web of carefully manipulated spacetime, its destructive potential contained and then gradually dissipated. In the aftermath, as the Luminar medical team spent days repairing the microfractures in Zyra's crystalline form, both species found themselves changed by the experience. The Luminar had learned that sometimes survival meant acting without perfect understanding, while the humans had seen how their quick intuition could be enhanced by the Luminar's deep wisdom. The conservative faction emerged from their isolation, humbled by their near-catastrophic error. Their attempt to resist change had nearly destroyed everything. But more importantly, the averted disaster had proven something crucial. Neither species' approach was inherently superior. True progress lay in learning from each other. As Alina sat beside Zyra's recovery chamber, the human scientist smiled at her immortal friend. "You know, for someone who's lived for 3,000 years, you adapted to human speed pretty quickly when it mattered." Zyra's response came faster than any Luminar had ever spoken before. "Perhaps that is the greatest wisdom of all, knowing when to change, learning to dance." The great hall of temporal studies aboard the Eternal Dawn had been transformed. Where once Luminar scientists spent decades in silent contemplation, now hybrid research teams of humans and Luminar worked together in a strange but effective rhythm. Alina Rodriguez's breakthrough in temporal field manipulation had led to the creation of what the humans playfully called time bubbles, spaces where both species could operate at compatible speeds. Commander Zyra, still bearing the subtle crystalline fractures from her experience during the crisis, watched as James Chen demonstrated a new engineering principle to a group of Luminar technicians. In the specialized temporal field, the humans moved slower than their natural pace, while the Luminar functioned at accelerated speed. The result was a meeting point where genuine collaboration became possible. "The quantum harmonics respond to emotional input," James explained, his words measured but not painfully slow. "We discovered this by accident. Human intuition combined with Luminar precision created something entirely new. The Luminar engineers, led by Cyrix, processed this information in minutes rather than their usual days. One of them, a younger crystal being named Lyra, actually raised her hand in a distinctly human gesture before speaking. Like music, she said, surprising everyone with her quick response. The quantum fields resonate with consciousness itself. In another section of the ship, human medical researchers worked alongside Luminar biologists to understand the fundamental nature of consciousness and time perception. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neurologist from Earth, had made an intriguing discovery. Your crystalline forms, she explained to her Luminar colleagues, they're not just bodies. They're temporal anchors. They're why you experience time so differently from us. And we think we might be able to learn from that. The implications were staggering. Not to grant humans the near immortality of the Luminar, both species had agreed that would be unwise, but to give humanity greater control over their own temporal experience. Meanwhile, the Luminar were learning to accelerate their natural processes when needed, to find a balance between careful contemplation and decisive action. Arxis, who had once been the most traditional of Zira's advisors, now spent considerable time in the human tempo zones. They've taught us something we never expected to learn, he told Zira during one of their now shorter consultation sessions. The value of improvisation. For all our accumulated knowledge, we never understood the power of intuitive leaps. But the changes weren't without their challenges. A significant minority of Luminar still struggled with the pace of change. Even with the temporal adaptation fields, some found human speed of thought and action disturbing. Similarly, some humans found it difficult to slow down and appreciate the Luminar's more methodical approach to problem solving. The solution came from an unexpected source. During a joint cultural exchange session, Elena Rodriguez introduced the concept of dance to the Luminar. Using the temporal fields, she demonstrated how different rhythms could coexist in harmony, how fast and slow movements could complement each other. Think of our species as dancers, she suggested, moving gracefully through a demonstration. Sometimes we move quickly, sometimes slowly, but always in rhythm with each other. The metaphor resonated with both species. The Luminar began to see how they could maintain their fundamental nature while still adapting to new rhythms when needed. The humans learned to appreciate the beauty of slower, more deliberate movements. This understanding led to breakthrough innovations. The Eternal Dawn's engines were modified to incorporate both Luminar precision and human intuition, creating a hybrid drive system that could navigate space-time more efficiently than either species had managed alone. The ship's quantum computers learned to process information at variable speeds, adapting to the needs of both crews. Even the conservative faction found a way to embrace the changes while maintaining their core identity. They proposed the creation of temporal sanctuaries aboard the ship, spaces where traditional Luminar could retreat to their natural time flow when needed, while still participating in the broader collaboration at their own pace. Commander Zira, watching all of this unfold, felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in over 2,000 years, genuine excitement about an uncertain future. In her private quarters, she practiced moving at different speeds, learning to shift her temporal perception like a dancer changing rhythms. "We're creating something unprecedented," Elena told her during one of their now regular discussions. "Not just technological advancement, but a new way of existing in the universe." Zira nodded, the gesture coming more quickly than it would have months ago. "Perhaps this is why the universe brought our species together. The Luminar had grown too rigid in our eternal existence, while humanity's brief lives drove them to rush through existence without fully experiencing it. Together, we're learning a better way." As if to demonstrate this point, a junior human scientist and a young Luminar researcher had just made a breakthrough in quantum communication. Working in one of the temporal harmony zones, they had discovered a way to transmit messages across vast distances without the usual light speed limitations. The discovery came through a perfect blend of human intuition and Luminar precision. Neither species could have achieved it alone. "We're not just learning to coexist. Arxis observed, watching the celebration that followed the breakthrough. "We're learning to dance together in the cosmic ballet." The phrase, poetic by luminar standards and yet precise by human ones, captured the essence of their evolving relationship. Two species, separated by vast differences in time perception and lifespan, had found a way to move together in harmony. New understanding. 1 year had passed since first contact, a heartbeat to the luminar, yet long enough for their civilization to undergo more change than the previous millennium. The eternal dawn had become a symbol of this transformation, its crystalline halls now housing a revolutionary experiment in cosmic cooperation. Commander Zira stood in the newly constructed Harmony Chamber, where representatives from both species gathered for a historic announcement. The room itself was a testament to their partnership, its architecture blending luminar crystalline precision with human artistic flair, while temporal fields allowed all present to experience time at a mutually comfortable pace. "The Luminar High Council has reached a decision," Zira announced, her words carrying both the weight of ages and a new swiftness of purpose. "We will establish joint colonies with humanity, not as mentors or students, but as equal partners in exploring the cosmos." The declaration would have once taken months to formulate. Now, thanks to the temporal harmony techniques developed by Elena and her team, the Council had made this monumental decision in just 2 weeks. More surprisingly, they had done so without sacrificing their characteristic thoroughness. Captain Sarah Chen, standing beside Zira, smiled at the assembled gathering. "Earth's governments have already approved the initiative. The first joint colony ships will launch within the month." The announcement sparked immediate discussion, Luminar and humans engaging in rapid-fire exchange of ideas that would have been impossible months ago. Through the temporal fields, the Luminar had learned to think and respond more quickly when needed, while humans had discovered the value of occasional deep contemplation. Elena Rodriguez, now the head of the Joint Temporal Physics Division, activated a holographic display showing their planned expansion into the galaxy. "We've identified 300 potential colony sites," she explained, "each chosen to capitalize on our complementary strengths." The map told a story of transformation. Some colonies would operate primarily at human speed, others at luminar pace, but most would function in the harmony zones that had become symbolic of their partnership. The colonies would be connected by a network of quantum communication relays that operated outside normal spacetime, another fruit of their combined innovation. "But the greatest discovery," Elena continued, "isn't technological. It's philosophical." She gestured to James Chen, who had been working with the Luminar biological research team. James stepped forward, his movements measured but purposeful. "We've learned that consciousness itself exists beyond traditional temporal constraints. The Luminar experience time slowly not because they must, but because they chose to over millennia of evolution. Humans rush through existence not because we must, but because we believed we had to." The implications rippled through the chamber. The Luminar had begun teaching humans techniques for expanding their temporal perception, allowing them to experience more within their brief lifespans. In return, humans had shown the Luminar how to embrace spontaneity without losing their fundamental nature. Arxis, who had become something of a bridge between the two cultures, shared the results of his latest research. "We've documented cases of Luminar scientists making intuitive leaps that would have once taken centuries of calculation. Meanwhile, human researchers working in our temporal fields have achieved insights that would normally require generations of study." But perhaps the most profound change was evident in the younger generations. Human children raised with access to temporal harmony zones showed remarkable abilities to shift their perceptual speed at will. Young Luminar, influenced by human enthusiasm, learned to embrace change while maintaining their species' deep wisdom. "We stand at a crossroads," Zira declared, her crystalline form gleaming with purpose. "Not just our two species, but the galaxy itself. The combined power of human innovation and luminar persistence will allow us to explore realms of science and understanding that neither of us could have achieved alone." Captain Chen nodded in agreement. "Humanity has always looked to the stars and dreamed. We rushed toward them, burning bright but brief. Now we found partners who can help us burn longer, while we help them burn brighter. The gathering concluded with an event that would have been unthinkable a year ago. A celebration that mixed human music and dance with luminar harmonic crystalline resonances. In the temporal harmony field, both species moved together, fast and slow, brief and eternal, creating something entirely new. Later, in her private quarters, Commander Zira reviewed the day's events with Alina. The human scientist had become not just a colleague but a friend, their different lifespans no longer a barrier to understanding. "Do you ever wonder," Alina asked, "what we'll discover out there together? Humans and Luminar, moving as one." Zira's response came with both ancient wisdom and newfound quickness. "I used to believe that eternal life meant having all the answers. Now I understand that the greatest gift is eternal wonder, something your species taught us despite your brief lives." As the Eternal Dawn prepared for its next mission, its crew now a permanent blend of both species, the galaxy seemed fuller of possibility than ever before. The humans had given the Luminar a new appreciation for the precious nature of each moment, while the Luminar had shown humanity that true progress didn't always require haste. Together, they had discovered a fundamental truth. Time was not a constraint to be fought, or a luxury to be hoarded, but a dance to be mastered. And in learning this dance, both species had found something greater than either immortality or speed. They had found balance. The stars awaited, and for the first time, they would be explored by beings who could appreciate both the swift current of discovery and the deep ocean of contemplation. The eternal and the ephemeral had learned to move as one, and the universe would never be the same.